Hey, is that visible?
Yes, it is.
Good day, and thank you for this opportunity. I sincerely regret that I cannot be with you in person today, and I'd also like to extend a special thank you to the CriSTaL team for providing this platform. The photograph shown here is unfortunately of a very low resolution, but it holds special meaning as it is the only one I could locate from my first meeting with Elmarie at the 2006 DEFSA conference. After that initial encounter, we met at several functions, during which Almarie introduced me to the concept of the proposed MAVA program. Instantly I knew this was exactly the program I wanted to pursue. It represented an ideal bridge between my technical undergraduate studies and a traditional university education. As a white male academic engaging in critical and decolonial scholarship within the post-apartheid South African context, I was acutely aware of the ethical, relational, and epistemological complexities inherent in this work. My positionality, shaped by my social identity, institutional affiliation, and cultural background, inevitably influenced various stages of the research process, from the framing of questions to the interpretation of data. I'm deeply conscious that without Elmarie as my supervisor on this journey, I would not have had attained the depth of critical understanding required for such a project. Her subtle yet incisive guidance continually challenged me to confront my own biases. Through her gentle provocations, I embarked on a process of self-discovery and cultivated an unassuming awareness of what it truly means to practice empathy, not as a theoretical concept, but as a lived ethical orientation in the research encounter. With your kind understanding, I would like to depart somewhat from the content of my published article later in this presentation to share some emerging reflections from my current work. To engage decoloniality meaningfully, we must consider not just what we teach, but how we teach it. This is where signature pedagogies become crucial. Coined by Lee Schulman and adopted for design by Anne Shreve, signature pedagogies refer to the characteristic teaching methods that shape how students think, act, and perform as professionals. In design education, 6 core pedagogical practices have been identified. Studio pedagogy, a space for making, experimenting, reflecting, and community building. Projects and briefs, assignments that mimic real-world challenges, fostering creativity and ambiguity. Materiality, hands-on engagement with physical and digital materials that shape how form and meaning emerge. Dialogue, iterative conversations between students and lecturers that deepen reflection and critical thinking. Critique or crit, structured feedback sessions that promote defense of ideas and responsiveness to evaluation. Research, both theoretical and practice-based inquiry that informs design decisions and situates work in broader context. Each of these pedagogies carries implicit cultural assumptions, often shaped by Eurocentric frameworks. When examined through a decolonial lens, they offer rich opportunities to challenge dominant narratives, embed local indigenous knowledge systems, promote relational learning, foster cultural representation, and belonging in the design studio. Studio-based learning has always been more than just a place to make things. It's where students develop ways of thinking, doing, and being. But things are shifting, and as universities pack in more students and lean harder on standardized systems, it becomes harder to maintain that intimate, hands-on studio culture. Educators often find themselves overwhelmed torn between admin work and trying to give students the personal attention they need. One of the biggest issues is that the studio is becoming less about learning through feedback and more about ticking boxes for assessment. The space for genuine critique and creative exploration is getting squeezed. On top of that, the emotional and intellectual demand of studio teaching are high, but support is often low, which leaves many creative lecturers burnt out and disconnected. And then there's the issue of belonging. For students coming from different cultural or socio-economic backgrounds, say from a rural or township community, the studio can feel like foreign territory. And if we don't actively make space for their voices, experiences and visual languages, they may feel like outsiders in a place that's supposed to nurture their growth. The dominance of Western ideas and aesthetics in art and design education also adds pressure. Students should be encouraged to bring their full selves into their work, their commutes, their stories, their neighborhoods, their languages, and educators need to be equipped to guide that journey, helping students connect their personal worlds to broader creative practices. And at the end of the day, a healthy studio culture needs mutual respect between students and lecturers, openness to diverse knowledges, and space to be critical of inherited norms. When that happens, the studio can become a truly transformative place, one that challenges colonial legacies and makes room for more meaningful, culturally grounded learning. Projects are the bread and butter of design education. They're usually driven by briefs and often modeled on real-world industry needs that come with enough freedom for students to figure things out on their own. A good brief doesn't spoon-feed answers. Instead, it invites questions, exploration, and sometimes failure, and that's where learning happens. The best projects do more than teach technical skills. They challenge students, spark creativity, and stay with them long after graduation. They also help build a sense of community, letting students learn from one another while discovering their own strengths and blind spots. But when briefs are disconnected from students' lived experiences, they can fall flat. If a project doesn't speak to where students come from or what they care about, it is unlikely to make a meaningful impact. We need to rethink how briefs are written. They should include references to our students' contexts and create space for local storytelling, oral traditions and indigenous knowledge. That way, students aren't just copying global trends, they're adding their own voices to the mix. So when students see their cultural heritage reflected in the current commercially relevant work they're asked to do, it builds confidence and relevance. Projects that do this well often bridge the gap between home and studio, helping students feel seen and valued. In design, materials are more than tools. They're part of the message. Whether it's paper, textiles, or digital formats, the way something feels, looks, or even smell can shape how we interact with it. Understanding the material side of making is essential to design education, yet it can be neglected because of financial pressures. For many students, especially those coming from places where design isn't traditionally a career choice, engaging with materials is how they begin to connect theory to practice. But when education is mass-produced, the time and space for experiment with materials get lost. Students end up rushing to meet deadlines, using what's available rather than what's meaningful. Materiality is also tied to identity. The materials students choose or are told to use can reflect their social class, their gender or cultural background. When educators ignore this, they risk reinforcing hierarchies of excluding certain ways of knowing and making. By bringing African histories, philosophies, and everyday objects into the studio, we can help students see the relevance of design. It's happening in their homes, their communities, and their languages. Teaching materiality with this lens makes design feel more real and more rooted in the world students actually live in. When students feel they belong, they can start to counter the hegemonic nature of global design. At its core, education is a conversation. And in design, this conversation often revolves around ideas, drafts, and artifacts. But it's not just about critiquing work, it's about creating a space where students feel safe to speak, to listen, and be heard. Too often, critiques focus on what's wrong instead of what's possible. What if, instead, we treat feedback like collaborative dialogue, one that happens in a professional yet supportive environment? When educators and students ask each other the right questions, the studio becomes a space of discovery rather than judgment. Dialogue also matters when it comes to inclusion. Talking about culture, identity, and background isn't an add-on. It should be baked into the curriculum. Open conversations about culture, language, and histories help students understand their own stories and how they shape their creative practices. And dialogue should also help students bridge the gap between who they are at home and who they're expected to be at university. It is in those honest exchanges that real learning happens, where knowledge is shared and not imposed. The crit is one of the most iconic and controversial aspects of design education. Ideally, it's a space where students learn to present their work, reflect on feedback, and refine their ideas. But too often, it becomes a performance, a stressful ritual where power dynamics go unchecked. Students may struggle to understand or express themselves in a language that isn't their own, when they're judged on how well they can talk the talk, rather than the quality of their ideas or process. It alienates rather than supports. So we need to reimagine the crit as a more inclusive practice, one that values diverse ways of seeing and speaking. This might mean allowing students to use their home languages or encouraging alternative formats of reflection. It's also about recognizing that not every student arrives with the same cultural capital and adjusting our expectations accordingly. Educators need training too. Many are skilled practitioners but haven't been taught how to teach. If we want crits to be meaningful, we need to equip staff with the tools and time to guide and not just judge. Design research is the backbone of design thinking, but it often ends up being misunderstood. And without proper guidance on design research, students feel lost. They don't know where to start, what to look for, or how to connect it to their creative process. So design research is well established with a broad spectrum of theories and approaches. And one of the approaches we could consider is design research as storytelling, a way for students to explore who they are, where they come from, and how they make sense of the world. That kind of inquiry is powerful, especially in contexts where students are navigating multiple identities and cultural expectations. It means letting students reflect on their own communities, their values and histories, and treating that as valid, rigorous knowledge. But here's the challenge: the resources, the training, and the time needed for supporting this kind of research are not always there. If we want design education to reflect the richness of design research in our students' work and lives, we need to build systems that value and support design research. Now here is where I want to divert a bit from my published article, and I want us to consider our signature pedagogies in the context of the challenges we face. So the assertion that the university is dying serves as a critical provocation, compelling us to reflect on the current state of higher education. Vibrant institutions dedicated to the pursuit of knowledge, creativity, and intellectual freedom, universities today face a troubling erosion of their core mission. And three interconnected issues have contributed significantly to this crisis: increasing bureaucracy, relentless commodification, and the prevalence of transactional instruction. Firstly, universities have become entangled in an ever-expanding web of bureaucracy. Administrative demands have multiplied, resulting in complex, rigid systems that stifle innovation and creativity. Rather than supporting educators and students, bureaucratic processes often divert resources and energy into compliance, accountability measures, and institutional rankings, overshadowing genuine educational outcomes. Secondly, commodification of education has transformed learning from a transformative experience into market-driven transaction. Universities increasingly position themselves as commercial enterprises, with students viewed as consumers and degrees as commodities. This shift prioritizes measurable outcomes, employability, profitability, enrollment figures, over deeper educational values such as intellectual curiosity, personal growth, and civic responsibility. Thirdly, instructional methods have become transactional, dominated by a narrow focus on measurable outputs rather than meaningful learning experiences. Teaching practices frequently reduce knowledge to simplistic, accessible units, limiting genuine exploration and engagement. This transactional approach undermines the potential of education to inspire, to challenge, and to transform. In the field of art and design, these issues manifest with particular severity. Historically, art and design education thrived on exploration, creativity, individual expression, and critical reflection. Yet, as art schools have been absorbed into traditional university structures, these essential qualities have been systematically undermined. It can be argued that standardization imposed by bureaucratic and commodified frameworks has severely restricted creative freedom. Artistic practice, once dynamic and experimental, is now often evaluated through rigid criteria and predefined outcomes. The shift can have profound implications, leading to a troubling loss of creativity, authenticity, and human engagement, the very elements that define impactful art and design education. As a critical pedagogue, I found a recent article published by the New Art School very intriguing. They argue for rediscovering the hand, eye, and heart. At the New Art School, they are not creating a nostalgic retreat into the past, but a radical reimagining of the future, guided by enduring principles. Their vision is inspired by the ideals of John Ruskin, who believed that the work of the hand, guided by the heart and the eye, is the foundation of true education and art. They believe in learning through doing, not in replicating knowledge, but in discovering truth through direct engagement with the world. Students will not simply receive instruction, they will observe, make, test, and reflect. What is most revolutionary and debatable is that they stated, no grades, no failure. We are abolishing grades and the concept of failure entirely. These are relics of an industrial education model designed to sort and quantify, not to nurture or inspire. Instead of grading, we practice reflection, critique, and growth. Students are not here to meet benchmarks, but to become. They will be responsible for their own learning journeys, supported by a community of mentors and peers. This is a system built not on control, but on trust. From information to wisdom in the digital age, information is cheap and ambiguous. One can learn any technique or theory online, often for free. What is missing is not access, but guidance, discernment, and the space to turn information into wisdom. This is the space they aim to create. When practiced with care, with integrity, and with love, art and design can elevate the human spirit, challenge injustice, and imagine better futures. This is what they mean when they say the new art school is not a school at all. It is a movement. Their motto is, let us not produce designers for machines. Let us raise human beings with hands, hearts, and eyes. Thank you for being part of this session with me. And as I bring this presentation to a close, I'd like to return to the heart of what today has been about. It's not just a conversation about pedagogy, but a deeper reflection on how we teach, how we learn, and how we build futures through design education. In talking about integrating decolonial theory through signature pedagogies, I've tried to show that our studios, our critiques, our briefs, our materials, even our silences carry meaning. They are not just technical exercises. They are spaces where power operates, where cultural narratives play out, and where students try to find themselves and their voices. And this journey has been profoundly shaped by the influences of Elmarie Constantius. Her way of working with care, with courage, and with curiosity taught me that decolonial teaching is not about having all the answers. It's about staying open, listening deeply, letting go of control, and being willing to be changed by what we learn, especially from our students. So without Elmarie's guidance, I don't think I would have come to understand just how much this work demands of us, not just intellectually, but ethically, emotionally, and relationally. Her quiet insistence that we trust the process, even when it's uncomfortable, continues to guide me. So, if, and as Janssen provocatively says, the university is dying, then I'd like to ask, what might be reborn in its place? So can we imagine studios that invite multiple ways of knowing? Can we design curricula that make space for healing as well as critique? Can we see our students not just as future professionals, but as citizen creators, capable of shaping more just, more inclusive, and more meaningful worlds? I think we can, and I think we must. Thank you so much for listening and for holding this space in honor of Elmarie. Okay, thank you very much. That's my presentation.
Thanks, Herman. Not sure if we have time for any questions or comments. Maybe.
Can I comment?
Yeah.
Herman, hi, it's Nikki. Thank you for
Hi,
your
Nikki.
presentation. And I must say, coming from a University of Technology in a design faculty, it was so wonderful to hear or to engage with your presentation because it is so exciting, actually, and resonant with the kind of work we're trying to do here at CPUT. And I just wanted to say thank you for that. I really enjoyed looking at your images as well, because it really brought your work and your institution alive. So thank you for that. That's all I had to say.
Thank you so much.
And can I carry on talking so long?
Yeah.
Also, I really appreciated what you were saying about critique and how we can do it differently, or how we need to do it differently, and how difficult that is, because so often we have to assess, there are projects that have to be finished and outputs that have to be done. And so it's just so nice, even if we don't have the answers, as you say at the end, it's really good to have these conversations and hopefully build build on these conversations and learn from and through each other. So thank you.
I must say, I've shown this presentation in the faculty, and I've had many people come to me to talk about their need to talk about being the person responsible for critiquing students' work and how you do that, and especially with younger staff, that there's work to be done. We can't expect people to start off in this business and not give them the tools to do it properly.
I agree, and especially when the business is becoming more and more kind of formalized and the currency so much is more and more on assessment and output and filling in forms and ticking boxes, etc. So I think often I'm imagining for new staff, you kind of want to do the right thing by the institution, even if it feels like it might be wrong in your gut.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Thanks, Nikki. Okay, I think that we're going to get on with. Do you have yours on your computer? Or
There's a question from Natasha.
sorry, I can't see because you've got this. If you minimize, you're still sharing the screen, so I can't see any people or anything.
Good afternoon, colleagues. It's Natasha speaking here. Thank you to Nikki and Ver for this wonderful colloquium and just this wonderful ode and honor to Almarie. So I come also from one of the design disciplines, visual communication design, and I simply just wanted to make a comment. I just wanted to commend Herman for this wonderful presentation. It felt like with every slide, I could say, yes, 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 like, put my hand up and say, yes, I can relate to that. Yes, I question that. Yes, like I wonder, how we can do it differently or better as educators. And yeah, I just want to say such a lovely presentation. So the questions are so curious and they are something I can definitely identify with. And especially for me in my, research as I'm developing a proposal, and Nikki knows about this for my PhD, I'm looking at a similar scope. But, one can kind of like throw what we'd call neurodiversity into this whole mix of stuff, and that kind of like shakes the pot up a bit more. When we look at the, neurotypicality and neurodiversity and neurodivergence and, students and even educators that would identify with being other-abled in this way, and just how that affects the entire ecosystem, I think that you just presented to us now, Herman. I think it could be even so much more, maybe complex or even interesting, at least for me, I find. Now that I'm finding this thing occur more and more with, just different emerging learning styles and phenomena. And this begs us as educators to look at how we are now going to not just train, but create resources and even assess and support students that identify as being other-abled. So thank you very much for that presentation. It was very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You're welcome to contact me if you want to talk further. I've found that to be very useful. Thank you, Nike. Thank you, Viv, for this opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you.